I never expected the day would come when I would feel so utterly betrayed by the two people I trusted most. My life had already been shattered by the loss of my mother, a loss that had plunged me into a darkness from which I had struggled to escape. In the aftermath of her death, I had sought help from a psychologist, Dr. Andrew Lawson, whose calm and steady guidance slowly lit a spark of hope in my otherwise bleak world. I had clung to his words, believing that his support would help me navigate through the endless maze of sorrow and guilt that engulfed my every waking moment. I trusted him implicitly as I bared my soul, recounting every painful memory, every tear that had once soaked my pillow in the nights after my mother's passing. At the time, I was still reeling from the profound loss. My mother had been my rock and my safe haven, and with her gone, I felt as if I were walking a tightrope over a bottomless abyss. The void she left was immeasurable, and nothing seemed capable of filling the emptiness inside me. In my vulnerability, I leaned heavily on Dr. Lawson. Our sessions were long and cathartic. He patiently helped me untangle the web of emotions that threatened to strangle me. I recall vividly the way he would say, "Grief is not something you overcome, it is something you learn to live with, step by step." His words resonated deeply within me, and slowly, over the months, I began to piece together the fragments of my broken heart. While I was working through the intricate labyrinth of loss and recovery, I also had to contend with the complexities of my marriage. My wife, Emily, had been by my side for over a decade. We had built our life together on what I had assumed was a foundation of mutual respect, trust, and love. In the early days of our union, we had shared our dreams and aspirations with a fervor that seemed invincible. I had always admired her strength and her beauty, and I took pride in the fact that we had weathered many storms together. Yet, as the months turned into years and the weight of my grief bore down on our relationship, subtle fissures began to appear, cracks that I initially dismissed as mere side effects of the stress that life had unfairly imposed upon us. It began with small absences and quiet moments of secrecy. Emily would come home later than usual, and when I inquired about her day, she offered only vague, half-hearted responses. I tried to convince myself that I was simply being overly suspicious in a time when I needed support and reassurance. After all, I was in the midst of a personal battle against despair, and perhaps I was too consumed by my own grief to notice the hints of a different kind of trouble. I told myself that love could sometimes be imperfect and that misunderstandings were bound to occur in even the most solid of relationships. I continued my therapy sessions with Dr. Lawson, and our conversations began to evolve from merely addressing my grief to exploring deeper, more existential questions about my future. In the dim light of his office, I started to see glimmers of hope, a possibility of emerging from the shadow of loss. His methods were gentle yet incisive, and I soon found myself unraveling layers of suppressed pain that I never knew existed. Dr. Lawson's empathy and expertise were a balm to my wounded soul, and I began to trust him with not only my past but my deepest hopes for a renewed future. Then, one unassuming evening, when the weight of the day seemed especially heavy, the truth crashed into my life like a tidal wave. I had come home early from a therapy session, the memory of my mother's laugh still echoing faintly in my mind, when I found Emily in our bedroom. The scene that unfolded before me was one I could hardly comprehend. There she was, wrapped in an intimacy with none other than Dr. Lawson. My heart pounded as the shock and betrayal coursed through my veins. The room, once a sanctuary of our shared life, transformed into a battleground of emotions, anger, sorrow, disbelief, all swirling within me in a chaotic maelstrom. In that instant, time seemed to freeze. I stood there, rooted to the spot, struggling to reconcile the image of the man who had once been my therapist and guide with the man who was now entwined in an act of treachery with my wife. Every lesson I had learned about trust and loyalty was suddenly upended. I felt as if the very ground beneath my feet had been ripped away, leaving me stranded in a void of betrayal and confusion. The shock was not merely about the act itself. It was the betrayal of two sacred bonds, the sanctity of my marriage and the sanctity of my healing process. For days after that revelation, I was numb. I scarcely ate or slept, and I wandered through my daily routines like a ghost, detached and hollow. I questioned every moment from the past, replaying conversations and memories in an endless loop, searching desperately for clues that might have forewarned me of the impending betrayal. How had I failed to see the signs? How had I been so blind to the subtle cues that now seemed glaringly obvious in hindsight? The answers eluded me, and instead, I was left with a deep, unrelenting sense of loss not only of my mother, but now of my wife and the man who was supposed to help me heal. The ensuing days were a blur of tear-stained nights and bitter confrontations. I confronted Emily, my voice trembling with a mix of sorrow and fury, demanding an explanation for her actions. Emily, with tears streaming down her face, stammered out explanations about loneliness, about feeling neglected during my long hours of therapy, and about the comfort she found in Dr. Lawson's presence. She insisted that nothing had happened, that it was a mere misunderstanding, a lapse in judgment that could be mended with time and forgiveness. But to me, her words rang hollow. The intimacy we once shared had been replaced by a betrayal so profound that it seemed impossible to repair. In the midst of this personal turmoil, I found myself caught between two realms of despair. On one hand, there was the agonizing void left by my mother's absence, a wound that I had been working so hard to heal. On the other, there was the gaping chasm of betrayal that now threatened to consume the last remnants of trust and love I had clung to in my marriage. Every therapy session with Dr. Lawson became a reminder of the double-edged sword he had unwittingly wielded. His office, once a place of solace and gentle encouragement, now harbored the ghosts of shattered trust. Yet, even as I grappled with the betrayal, a part of me could not completely cast aside the role he had played in helping me rebuild my life. The contradiction was overwhelming. I was torn between gratitude for his help in my recovery and the searing pain of his involvement in my personal tragedy. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere at home grew suffocating. Emily and I tried to navigate the treacherous waters of reconciliation, but every attempt at intimacy was marred by the memory of that fateful night. We sought counseling together, attempting to untangle the complex web of emotions and mend the broken strands of our relationship. Yet, each session only deepened the wounds, as the betrayal could not be erased by simple words of apology or promises of change. I found myself questioning every facet of our shared past, wondering how we had allowed such darkness to creep into our lives without detection. During this period, I also began to reflect on my own vulnerabilities. The loss of my mother had left me emotionally raw, and in that fragile state, I had perhaps unwittingly created an environment where betrayal could take root. I questioned whether I had been too absorbed in my own grief to truly see what was happening around me, whether my desperate need for healing had blinded me to the shifting dynamics in my marriage. In those solitary moments, I realized that the healing process is not linear, and sometimes, the scars that form along the way never fully fade. Instead, they serve as constant reminders of the fragility of human connection. I attempted to find solace in routine activities and hobbies that once brought me joy. I took long walks in the park, immersing myself in the simple beauty of nature, and I even returned to painting, a passion I had abandoned in the wake of my mother's death. Slowly, these small acts of self-care began to stitch together the torn fabric of my spirit. However, even as I started to rediscover pieces of my old self, the betrayal continued to haunt me. There were nights when I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by visions of Emily and Dr. Lawson together, their faces blurred into a nightmarish collage of broken promises and shattered trust. The internal battle raged on. On some days, I felt an overwhelming surge of anger, a burning desire to confront both Emily and Dr. Lawson and demand accountability for the pain they had inflicted upon me. On other days, a profound sadness would wash over me, as I mourned not only the loss of my mother but also the loss of the future I had envisioned with Emily, a future that now seemed irretrievably tarnished. I found myself oscillating between extremes, caught in a vortex of conflicting emotions that left me drained and uncertain of my own identity. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of emotional turmoil, I decided to revisit the sanctuary of my old journal, a repository of my innermost thoughts and feelings that had somehow survived the passage of time. As I leafed through the pages, I was struck by how candidly I had once documented my journey through grief. Each entry was a raw, unfiltered expression of pain and hope, a testament to the strength I had mustered in the face of overwhelming loss. I realized that in the midst of betrayal and heartache, I still possessed an inner resilience that had carried me through the darkest of times before. That realization became a turning point in my journey toward reclaiming my life. I began to write again, pouring my anguish and my tentative hope into each new page, determined to rediscover the man I had been before the twin tragedies upended my world. As the days turned into weeks, I gradually started to see a faint glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel. I accepted that the path to healing would be a long, winding one, marked by setbacks and small victories. I recognized that forgiving Emily and Dr. Lawson might never be fully possible, but I also understood that clinging to the anger would only serve to anchor me in a state of perpetual pain. Slowly, I began to let go of the need for retribution, focusing instead on the small, everyday moments that reminded me of life's potential for renewal. I reached out to old friends, reconnected with family members, and even joined a support group for those who had experienced betrayal. In these gatherings, I discovered that I was not alone. Others had also borne the scars of shattered trust, and in sharing our stories, we forged bonds of understanding and compassion that transcended our individual suffering. There were still days when the memories of that night would surge forth unexpectedly. A familiar song on the radio, the soft glow of the evening light, and I would be transported back to that moment of heart-wrenching betrayal. Yet, with each passing day, the sting grew less acute, replaced by a weary acceptance of the past. I learned that healing was not about erasing the pain entirely, but about finding the strength to live with it, to integrate it into the tapestry of one's life, without allowing it to define every moment. I began to see that the betrayal, as devastating as it was, had also served as a catalyst for my personal growth. It forced me to confront the fragility of trust, the impermanence of relationships, and ultimately, the enduring resilience of the human spirit. Now, as I sit here and reflect on the tumultuous journey I have endured, I am struck by the paradox of it all. The very people who had once been my lifelines, Emily, my wife, and Dr. Lawson, the psychologist who had helped guide me through the storm of grief, had also been the architects of my most profound heartbreak. Their betrayal cut deep, leaving scars that, even now, serve as constant reminders of the fragility of the bonds we form with one another. And yet, in that same act of betrayal, I discovered something unexpected, a newfound understanding of my own strength. I realized that despite the devastation I had endured, I was still here, still fighting, still capable of love and hope. It was not an easy road. The nights were long and the days, often monotonous in their quiet despair. There were moments when I questioned whether I would ever be able to trust again, whether the deep wounds inflicted by betrayal could ever truly heal. I sought solace in literature and in long, reflective walks along the river, where I would sit in silence and watch the water flow relentlessly onward, a silent metaphor for life itself. I began to document my journey in a blog, sharing my experiences with strangers who, like me, were trying to piece together the fragments of a broken life. In doing so, I discovered that the act of sharing was in itself a form of healing. The words I typed out became a testament to my struggle, a way of reclaiming a part of myself that had been lost in the depths of despair. I gradually came to understand that forgiveness was not an absolution of the pain I had endured, but rather a personal choice to release the heavy burden of anger and resentment that had threatened to engulf me. Forgiveness did not mean forgetting what had happened. It meant accepting it as part of my story and choosing to move forward despite the scars. It was a process that took time, effort, and a relentless commitment to self-care. I found that by focusing on the things that still brought me joy, my art, my writing, the genuine connections with friends and strangers alike, I could slowly begin to reclaim a sense of normalcy. I discovered that healing was not about erasing the past, but about integrating it into a broader narrative of resilience and hope. Even now, as I recount these memories, I am filled with a bittersweet sense of gratitude. The betrayal I experienced will forever be a part of me, a permanent mark etched into my soul. Yet, in its own painful way, it taught me that the human heart is capable of extraordinary endurance. I learned that even in the face of profound loss and betrayal, there exists a wellspring of inner strength that can propel us forward, no matter how insurmountable the obstacles may seem. I learned that vulnerability is not a weakness, but a testament to the fact that we are all capable of loving deeply, and sometimes, that love comes with an inevitable risk of heartbreak. Looking back, I understand that the journey through grief and betrayal was not a linear path, but a labyrinthine process filled with unexpected detours and painful revelations. I now see that every tear shed, every moment of despair, and every burst of anger was a stepping stone toward a deeper understanding of myself. I have come to accept that the scars I bear are not symbols of defeat but marks of survival, a testament to the fact that I have lived, loved, and grown despite the odds. And while I will always mourn the loss of my mother and grieve for the trust that was broken, I have also learned to embrace the impermanence of life, finding solace in the knowledge that even in our darkest moments, there lies the potential for renewal. Today, I stand at a crossroads, a place where the memories of pain and betrayal coexist with the promise of a future that I am slowly beginning to rebuild. I do not claim to have all the answers or to be completely whole, but I do know that I am more resilient than I ever imagined. The journey ahead remains uncertain, but I carry with me the lessons of the past and the quiet conviction that I will continue to forge a new path, one step at a time. The betrayal by the two people I trusted most has left an indelible mark on my life, yet it has also forced me to confront the deeper truths about love, loss, and the human capacity for forgiveness. As I pen these words, I feel a sense of catharsis, a release of the pent-up emotions that have haunted me for far too long. I write not only as a testimony to my own pain, but as a message to anyone who finds themselves grappling with the betrayal of those they hold dear. Know that it is possible to emerge from the depths of despair, to rebuild a life that is richer and more authentic, even if the scars remain. The journey is arduous and often lonely, but every step forward is a victory over the forces that once threatened to consume you. In sharing my story, I hope to shed light on the complexities of human relationships, the interplay of trust, love, vulnerability, and the sometimes painful reality that those closest to us can, at times, inflict the deepest wounds. I have come to accept that life is a tapestry of intertwined moments of joy and sorrow, and it is up to us to weave these threads into a narrative that ultimately reflects our resilience and capacity for growth. While I will always carry the burden of betrayal and the memory of my mother's irreplaceable presence, I also carry the hope that someday, the scars will transform into symbols of a journey survived and a spirit that refused to be broken. I'm still learning to live with the choices made by others, choices that altered the course of my life irrevocably. But in the midst of the betrayal, I have found a deeper understanding of who I am and what it means to truly heal. I no longer define myself solely by the pain I have endured, but by the strength I have mustered in the face of adversity. My story is one of loss, yes, but it is also a story of survival, redemption, and the slow, painful, yet ultimately transformative process of reclaiming one's life after it has been shattered by betrayal. I know that the road ahead will not be easy, and there will be days when the memories threaten to pull me back into the darkness. Yet, I choose to move forward, armed with the knowledge that every scar, every moment of heartbreak, has contributed to the person I am today, a person capable of love, forgiveness, and the unwavering belief that life, in all its imperfections, is worth living.